We're here today in the magnificent building of the Working Class Movement Library on the Crescent. I'd like to talk to you about the New Bailey Prison, which was on New Bailey Street, Salford. Built in 1787 and demolished in 1868 to make way for the newly opened Strangeways prison. This prison was infamous or famous, depending on your point of view, for several reasons. It was the prison that catered for the Manchester area for public executions. There were 6 in total carried out at the New Bailey prison. These were rather barbaric affairs. So crowds of 10-15,000 would turn up for public execution, and they'd make a day of it. They'd bring food, be singing, dancing, vying for a better vantage spot to view the executions. Rather macabre spectacle. But today I'd like to talk to you about the unfortunate story of 3 Irishmen, William Allen, Michael Larkin and Michael O'Brien. These 3 men achieved fame or notoriety throughout the world, and they became known as the Manchester Martyrs. These men were hung in public for the murder of a police sergeant, Sergeant Brett, and here is their story. The Fenian Brotherhood was set up in 1858 in New York. It was basically the overthrow of Ireland, a free state of Ireland, and they would do it at any means necessary. In Manchester there was 2 chaps, Thomas Kelly and Timothy Deasy. They were the main leaders for the Manchester area. They were rounded up by the police and taken to prison. They were due to face trial, and I think they were looking at a harsh prison sentence, to say the least. A daring escape bid was formulated by the gentleman who was in charge of the Manchester branch, called Edward Omega Condon. Now, he formulated a plan to spring the men from a prison van as it made its way from the courts in Manchester on its way to Bellevue prison. The morning of the trial, on the way back to the prison, the van was attacked by a gang estimated at 25-30 strong Fenians. They shot one of the police horses, shot one of the police officers who was on the van, and attempted to gain entry to release the prisoners. The sergeant who was in the van, was Sergeant Brett, wouldn't open the door. When they asked him to open the door, and not very politely, should imagine, he shouted through the keyhole, and I quote this, "I dare not, I must do my duty." Now, these words were to be inscribed on his tombstone. One of the Fenians, unnamed, shot through the prison keyhole, hit Brett in the eye, killed him. One of the people in the van got the keys off Brett, put it through a ventilation hatch, and the 2 prisoners escaped. They were never caught, but they made their way to America by all accounts. The 3 men that I mentioned earlier, Allen, Larkin and O'Brien, they were rounded up along with 25 other Fenians who were suspected of taking part in this, what they called an outrage. Following the death of Sergeant Brett and the escape of the 2 prisoners, a huge police manhunt swept into operation. Dozens and dozens of Irishmen were rounded up, and eventually 25 were charged, 5 charged with murder. The 3 men, Allen, Larkin and O'Brien, stood trial at Manchester, charged with the murder of Sergeant Brett. They were all found guilty and sentenced to be hung on the 23rd of November 1867 at the New Bailey prison. Now, this would have been a very gruesome spectacle, to say the least, hung up outside, but a strange footnote I was reading about this case. The public hangman, William Calcraft. For a public hangman, the strange thing is he wasn't very good at his job. He'd often mistime the drops. There was a long drop and a short drop. Thing being that you were supposed to break your neck when you were hung, but Calcraft, he botched up regular. Many a time he'd be found beneath the gallows, swinging on the poor unfortunate soul's feet to break his neck or choke him to death. Another perk of his job, which I discovered, was that he was entitled to the dead people's clothing, which he would then sell to Madame Tussauds, or if the case was particularly gruesome or famous, this one was, he was allowed to sell the executioner's rope in inches or a foot, depending on the most money he could get for it. The morning of the execution, the men were led out, and as I said, there was a crowd, 10,000 there, all in full spirits, drinking, singing popular songs of the day, Rule Britannia, John Barleycorn, but beer was on sale, and people had taken the children to see this. It was a public holiday virtually for them. It also reported that there was no Irish people in the crowd. The local priests had been told to go to the local Irish communities and ask them to stay away for fear of trouble. The 3 men took to the gallows, and they were all dropped at once in what was known as a triple drop. Alan died straight away, fortunately, but it is recorded that Larkin had to be finished off by Calcraft. That meant going below, tugging at his feet until the poor chap died. The other chap, O'Brien, he suffered a worse fate. He'd completely misjudged the drop on him, and it took him 45 minutes to die, and there was a Catholic priest below helping O'Brien. Calcraft still went ahead, and it still took him 45 minutes to finish the unfortunate chap off. These men have gone down in folklore history, have become known as the Manchester Martyrs. Statues were erected throughout Ireland for them. There's even one in Moston in, I do believe, St Joseph's Cemetery. There used to be regular marches to it by the Irish communities. That is the story of the Manchester Martyrs, and if you're interested, come to this library. Fabulous collection of books on Irish history, and you can learn a whole lot more.